What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content going up on the channel. If you're looking for MLS Cup thoughts and recap, that video is already up there. It's a separate video dedicated exclusively to the LA Galaxy's triumph over the New York Red Bulls. For this video, I just wanted to go through some quick Premier League thoughts from the weekend, kind of the other stuff that happened outside of MLS Cup, starting with Tottenham and Chelsea. Spurs jump out to a 2-0 lead, but it is ultimately Chelsea who come away with the 4-3 win. And these last few weeks, and this game in particular, illustrated that Spurs, and this is not new, but it's really been reinforced here recently, Spurs are predictably unpredictable. You just don't know what you're going to get week to week, game to game. That is not a sustainable form of success to get to where Spurs want to be. And you look at a game like this, and a team with Chelsea that's obviously in good form, lots of confidence, playing really well so far under Enzo Maresca. You're going to win some of these, you're going to lose some of these. It's not that Spurs played poorly. If you go look at the XGs that I was seeing, it was about even with the penalties and heavily favoring Spurs without them. And of course, part of that is Spurs just generally take a lot of shots, create a lot of opportunities because they dominate the ball, so their XG is going to be high. But even in this game, they showed up. They were right there. They have shown you they are capable of beating anybody on their day, and they are capable of losing to anybody. You're not always going to win games against the Manchester Cities, the Chelseas, the Arsenals, the Tottenham, the Liverpools, excuse me. That's kind of the whole point of the Big Six thing is you're going to win some of those, lose some of those, draw some of those. If you can get a huge advantage in those head-to-head battles, that goes a long way towards your positioning in the table, maybe deciding a title race. Don't want to get into all that, though. In order for Spurs to take this jump, to get back to where they were at their height under Mauricio Pochettino, they have to become more consistent. And the concerning part about this for me is that, and I know both of them were ultimately substituted. Romero had to leave the game with an injury. But the center back started this game. Because there was this idea that, okay, if Ange can get his defense, particularly his center backs, healthy, and particularly Mickey Van de Ven, because he's so important to the way they play, that some of those up and downs and the ebbs and flows of last season were going to stabilize. And I was willing to give Ange the benefit of the doubt on that. There are a lot of things I respect about the way he's approaching this. But we're now basically a year and a half in. And it is the same story. It looks great at times. Other times they have it, right? They're handed teams their first win of the season, multiple occasions so far. The penalties were completely unnecessary, just horrible decisions. This is not sustainable. And being stubborn about it is not going to get Ange anywhere. Yes, don't compromise your principles in terms of how you want to play. But you got to tweak some things. You got to become a little bit more conservative at times. And I go back to Greg Vandy and the Galaxy because they're a good example of this. They made adjustments, played differently based on the fact that the Red Bulls didn't want the ball. You can't just do one thing. Spurs are not good enough. Manchester City maybe is good enough to enforce their will if they really only wanted to play one way. But even Pep evolves, right? This looks very different than it did 5 years ago. And he's probably going to experiment some more with the injuries they're dealing with and the fact that things aren't going well right now. We'll get to them in a minute. But that's where I'm concerned if I'm a Spurs fan, is that we have seen no improvement, no changes, no indication that there's ultimately going to be an end to this up and down, ebbs and flows, week to week, game to game thing. And If Spurs are serious about being one of the top clubs in this league, that's not good enough. On the Chelsea side, give them credit. I'm still slightly skeptical. I want to see how long they can keep this up. But right now, they look like the best title challenger to Liverpool. Still think Arsenal might have something to say about that as well, even though they dropped points this weekend. Cole Palmer is phenomenal. He showed it again in this game. Just to top it off, he goes with the Panenka. I'm just running out of words to describe how good that guy is. And I really fundamentally believe, and it's hard, Chelsea can keep winning all the games they want. I really feel like, and I think I've said this before, this is more about him than it is about the rest of that team or about Enzo Maresca. Not to diminish and say that none of those things are. Nicholas Jackson scoring goals. The midfield is back to looking what it. Moses Caicedo is back to being Moses Caicedo. I felt like that was a transfer that just couldn't go wrong, and then it kind of did. But ultimately, he's figured it out here and gotten comfortable. There are other reasons why they are so much better this season. But Cole Palmer is that dude, and that is reason number one for me. Second, I want to touch on all of the developments at Manchester United here. Ruben Amorim is saying, massive club, not a massive team. Then Jim Ratcliffe says we're a mediocre club at the moment. And then Dan Ashworth is gone after less than 6 months, after it took basically that amount of time to actually get him in the door. And of course, a couple losses thrown in there as well. This most recent one to Nottingham Forest. I've talked at length about United and my skepticism that things are going to change. But the excitement about Ruben Amorim was justified. So the best thing you can do if you're Manchester United, and it seems like this is where things are going. So this is a good sign, as far as I can tell, if you are a United fan. You have got to just level the expectations, take all of the responsibility, the weight off of Amorim, and let him work. Let him do whatever he needs to do. He's got fitness concerns. Let him work through that, even if it costs you games. Let him experiment. Let him keep playing a formation that doesn't seem to work with these players, whatever it takes. Because he is not the problem. Maybe Eric Ten Hag contributed to the problem, but Ten Hag was not the problem either. This is a guy that is worth backing and worth sticking with. I know this is way too early to have those kind of what does this mean for his future conversations. That's not where I'm going with this. But if you want this to work long term, you have got to just let him take his lumps, go through the growing pains, embrace them, and say, we are just nowhere close to where we need to be. And we're not expecting him to be this immediate fix and to be this solution. There are structural issues that are way out of his control. And until those are fixed, no manager is going to have the kind of success that we expect here. And so hearing things like mediocre and Amorim being very transparent about the fact that he doesn't think this team is good enough right now. And if you think Dan Ashworth was a mistake, do it right now. Cut those ties. Even though it's embarrassing, it's a bad look, you've had enough of that already. Right? From a PR standpoint, it just can't get that much worse. Of course, there are things that can make it worse, but you get my point. So that's what I came away from all of these recent developments with United thinking about is it seems like everybody is just trying to really lower expectations and make people understand this is going to be a long-term process. And that is the first step to actually turning this thing around is acknowledging how much work you have to do and not laying that all at the feet of your manager. So I do think this was ultimately a good sign for United. What that means moving forward, who knows? Finally, I mentioned Manchester City earlier. They draw 2-2 with Crystal Palace. Palace really started the game well. You wonder if there's going to be another one of those days for Manchester City, but they ultimately did show up and played pretty well in this game. They didn't dominate to the point where it was completely unfair that Palace got a point out of this, but they looked more like themselves, at least during stretches. So that should be acknowledged. Pep does seem to be figuring some things out here and that they are getting back to where everybody expects them to be, at least somewhere in that ballpark. But you can't, right? You have no very little margin for error at this point because you're so far behind. So any draw is problematic in terms of the title race, but that's not what Pep is thinking about right now. You got to get this, and rightfully so. You got to get this figured out first, and then if you can get back in the title race, great. But you got bigger issues to deal with. The thing I really want to talk about in this game, though, is I just want to take a moment to appreciate the performance from Will Hughes. He had the game of his life. He was intercepting passes, producing assists, driving the ball forward, generating attacks and good quality chances. I was looking at some of his stats on FB Ref after this game, and it was laughable. You compare what he did in this game to what he has done all season, it was extraordinary. And you don't often see performances like that from kind of, journeyman midfielders or, players that you just don't really think about, that the big clubs aren't trying to sign. He's just kind of been around, had some good moments, but it's never really done much to stand out. He was spectacular in this game. So it's always fun when you get those moments and you get to really highlight a player who deserves all of the plaudits for what he did in this game. He was a huge part of Crystal Palace being able to get a point, and that is not something you typically say about Will Hughes, and it was every element of the game. Defensively, kind of bringing the ball forward and being part of the attack, creating chances, set piece delivery, it was everything. So congratulations, Will Hughes. That was something to watch. Going back and seeing the highlights probably won't even do it justice because it was all the little things, and it was the way that he then made players around him better and set them up for success. Never seen Will Hughes look that good before, so I wanted to give him a shout out. That's all I've got for this edition of the Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.